General Harrison Cole laughed. Women can't fly fighter jets. But 20 minutes later, when he discovered who was piloting the F-22 that shot down enemy jets one by one, his face turned completely white. Meet Emily Shadow Parker, 28 years old, black hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail, blue eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing nothing. For 3 years, she'd worked at Edwards Air Force Base in California as an administrative assistant. Every morning at 0600 hours, she arrived with coffee for the pilots, filed paperwork, answered phones, and cleaned the briefing rooms. The fighter pilots barely acknowledged her existence. To them, she was just another civilian contractor, invisible background noise in their high-stakes world of supersonic aircraft and aerial combat. But what none of them knew was that Emily Parker had been born into aviation royalty. Her father, Colonel Michael Spector Parker, had been one of the most decorated F-22 Raptor pilots in U.S. Air Force history. Before his death in a classified mission over Libya 5 years ago, he had secretly trained his daughter in everything from basic aerodynamics to advanced combat maneuvers. Every weekend of her childhood had been spent at private airfields learning to fly everything from Cessnas to military trainers. The irony was crushing. While testosterone-fueled pilots joked about women being too emotional for combat flying, Emily possessed more actual flight hours in military aircraft than half the squadron. Her father had used his connections to get her unofficial training time in F-16s and even a few precious hours in the F-22 Raptor itself. But when she applied for Air Force pilot training after college, she was rejected, not for lack of skill, but because of her father's classified mission status and the political complications that surrounded his death. So, she took the only job available at Edwards, serving coffee to the same pilots who should have been her colleagues. General Robert Hayes was the worst of them all. At 52 years old, with silver hair and a chest full of medals, he commanded the 411th Fighter Squadron with an iron fist and old-school attitudes that belonged in the 1950s. Hayes had built his career on the belief that fighter aviation was a man's world, period. He'd blocked female pilot applications, made disparaging comments about women in combat roles, and proudly displayed a sign in his office that read, "Real pilots don't need GPS. They navigate by instinct." Every morning when Emily brought his coffee, Hayes would barely look up from his mission briefs. If he acknowledged her at all, it was usually with some condescending comment about women being naturally suited for support roles. Emily endured it all in silence, knowing that arguing would only confirm his biases. Have you ever been overlooked simply because of who people assumed you were, not who you actually were? Drop a comment below if you've ever had to prove yourself against impossible expectations. The morning of December 3rd started like any other. Emily arrived at 0600 with coffee and donuts for the morning briefing. The squadron was preparing for a routine training exercise, aerial combat maneuvers against simulated enemy aircraft. As she distributed coffee, she heard the familiar banter between pilots, the casual confidence of men who controlled the most advanced fighter jets on Earth. "Weather's perfect for flying today," said Captain Walker, accepting his coffee without looking at her. "Should be easy hunting against those Navy boys." "They won't know what hit them," laughed Lieutenant Commander Brooks. "F-22s versus FA-18. It's not even fair." General Hayes stood at the front of the briefing room, pointing at a tactical display showing the California Desert Training Area. "Gentlemen, today's exercise simulates a defensive scenario. Enemy aircraft will attempt to penetrate our airspace and strike strategic targets. Our job is to intercept and neutralize them before they reach the protected zone." As he spoke, Emily continued her invisible work, refilling coffee cups and collecting empty plates. But her trained ears were absorbing every detail of the mission parameters, aircraft positions, and tactical considerations. Her father had taught her to think like a pilot, even when she couldn't fly like one. "The exercise begins at 1000 hours, Hayes continued. "We'll have 6 F-22s airborne, plus ground-based radar support. Should be a textbook interception." That's when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the base as the emergency klaxon echoed across every building. The briefing room erupted into chaos as pilots grabbed their gear and ran toward the flight line. But this wasn't the scheduled exercise alarm. This was real. "All personnel, this is not a drill." "Ma'am, did you say Michael Parker?" "Spector Parker." "Yes, Sergeant." Lewis turned to Hayes with wide eyes. "Sir, Spector Parker was a legend. If she's his daughter and if she actually has F-22 time. This is insane, Hayes exploded. She's a civilian contractor. She brings us coffee. I don't care who her father was. I'm not putting an untrained. Sir, interrupted the radar operator. Bogies are now 10 minutes out descending through 30,000 feet. We need birds in the air now. Emily walked to the equipment locker and began pulling out a flight suit. General, you have a choice. You can let ego cost American lives or you can let me prove what my father taught me. As she suited up with practiced efficiency, Hayes watched in stunned silence. Her movements were fluid, professional, exactly like every qualified pilot he'd ever seen preparing for flight. But his pride, his prejudices, and his career-long beliefs fought against accepting what he was seeing. I could court-martial you for even suggesting this, he said weakly. You could, Emily replied, zipping up the flight suit that fit her perfectly. But in 8 minutes, enemy aircraft are going to penetrate American airspace. Your choice, sir. Have you ever watched someone's entire worldview collapse in real time? Share this story if you believe talent doesn't ask permission. It just performs when needed. The walk to the flight line felt like a movie scene in slow motion. Emily strode across the tarmac in her flight suit, helmet under her arm while every ground crew member, mechanic, and pilot stared in disbelief. The coffee girl was walking toward a $150 million F-22 Raptor like she owned it. Master Sergeant Lewis had made the decision for Hayes. Ma'am, you're taking aircraft 082517. She's fueled, armed, and ready. Your call sign for this mission is Shadow Hawk. As Emily approached the F-22, the sleek gray aircraft seemed to recognize her. This wasn't her first time in a Raptor cockpit. Her father had somehow arranged training flights that were supposed to be impossible for civilians. Every switch, every display, every system was exactly where muscle memory expected it to be. The ground crew chief, Staff Sergeant Miller, approached cautiously. Ma'am, I need to ask, do you actually know how to start this thing? Emily looked at him with the same calm expression she'd worn while serving coffee. Sergeant, I could start this aircraft blindfolded. The question is whether your general has the courage to let me save his base. As she climbed the ladder to the cockpit, the radar operator's voice echoed across the flight line. All aircraft bogies now 7 minutes out. Multiple contacts bearing 210 degrees southwest. Emily settled into the pilot's seat like she was coming home. Her hands moved automatically through the startup sequence. Master power on. Engine start sequence initiated. Avionics systems online. The twin Pratt & Whitney engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and the most advanced fighter jet in the world came alive under her control. In the tower, General Hayes watched through binoculars as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. The woman who had been invisible to him for 3 years was performing aircraft startup procedures with the precision of a seasoned combat pilot. Sir, said the air traffic controller. Shadow Hawk is requesting immediate takeoff clearance. Hayes grabbed the radio microphone with shaking hands. This decision would either save the base or end his career. Shadow Hawk, this is Tower. You are cleared for immediate takeoff. God help us all. Emily's voice came back through the radio, calm and professional. Tower, Shadow Hawk rolling. Time to see what Dad taught me. The F-22 Raptor accelerated down the runway like a silver bullet. At 180 knots, Emily pulled back on the stick and the aircraft leaped into the California sky with supernatural grace. In the tower, experienced pilots watched in silence as the coffee girl executed a takeoff that was textbook perfect. All aircraft, this is Shadow Hawk, Emily's voice crackled through the radio. I'm climbing to 40,000 feet, heading southwest to intercept. Let's show these visitors they picked the wrong airspace. At 35,000 feet, Emily's radar picked up the incoming aircraft. 6 bogies in 2 flights of 3 approaching at high speed. But something was wrong with their signatures. These weren't the Navy FA-18s scheduled for the training exercise. These aircraft had characteristics that matched no friendly fighter in the American inventory. Tower Shadow Hawk. I'm showing 6 unknown aircraft. Estimated distance 50 miles and closing. These are not Navy birds. Repeat. These are not friendlies. Hayes's blood ran cold. The training exercise had been cancelled due to the pilot shortage, but someone hadn't gotten the message, or someone was using the scheduled exercise as cover for something much more sinister. Shadow Hawk Tower. Can you identify aircraft type? Emily adjusted her radar settings using techniques her father had taught her for analyzing unknown contacts. Tower radar signature suggests modified fighter aircraft, possibly foreign manufacturer. They're flying in combat formation and maintaining radio silence, recommend treating as hostile. The next few minutes would determine whether Emily Parker was really her father's daughter or just a coffee girl with delusions of grandeur. 6 enemy aircraft against 1 F-22 Raptor piloted by someone the world thought couldn't fly. But in the cockpit of aircraft 082517, Emily Parker smiled for the first time in 3 years. Her father's voice whispered in her memory. When the moment comes, sweetheart, show them what a real pilot looks like. All stations, this is Shadow Hawk engaging hostile aircraft. Time to earn my call sign. The first enemy aircraft never saw her coming. Emily had climbed to 45,000 feet using the F-22 stealth characteristics to remain invisible until the perfect moment. When she dove from the sun, her first AM-120 missile was in the air before the enemy pilot even knew he was being hunted. Fox 3, she called, using the standard terminology for missile launch. Splash 1. The first enemy aircraft disintegrated in a ball of fire and debris. The remaining 5 scattered, finally realizing they were facing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. In the tower, General Hayes watched the radar display in stunned silence as one red dot vanished from the screen. The coffee girl had just scored her first air-to-air kill. Holy hell, whispered Captain Turner, one of the healthy pilots. She actually did it. But Emily wasn't finished. The enemy aircraft were regrouping, trying to use their numerical advantage to overwhelm her. They had made a critical mistake. They thought they were fighting one desperate pilot in a single aircraft. They had no idea they were facing the daughter of Spectre Parker, trained from childhood to think like a predator in 3-dimensional space. Emily pulled the F-22 into a vertical climb that would have grayed out most pilots, then rolled inverted and dove toward the second group of enemy aircraft. Her maneuvers were so aggressive, so precisely calculated that even experienced pilots watching from the ground couldn't believe what they were seeing. Shadow Hawk, you have 2 bogeys coming up from your 6, called the radar operator. Copy Tower, I see them. Dad always said the best defense is making the other guy too dead to shoot. She pulled a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible. A high G turn that brought her around behind the pursuing aircraft in seconds. Her second missile launch came so quickly that the enemy pilots didn't have time to react. Fox 3. Splash 2. Hayes was now standing at the tower window, watching the impossible air battle unfold in the distance. Contrails traced through the sky like deadly ballet as Emily outfought and outflew 6 enemy aircraft simultaneously. Sir, said Master Sergeant Lewis quietly, I've never seen anything like this. She's flying like her father, Hayes finished, his voice barely a whisper. The third and fourth kills came within 30 seconds of each other. Emily had split the remaining enemy formation, forcing them to choose between protecting themselves and completing their mission. When they chose self-preservation, she picked them off one by one with the cold precision of a trained killer. Shadow Hawk Tower. Outstanding work. RTB when ready. Negative Tower. Still have 2 bogeys heading for the base. This isn't over yet. The final 2 enemy aircraft were making a desperate run toward Edwards, probably hoping to cause damage before being destroyed. But they had made a fatal error. They were flying straight and level, focused on their target instead of the predator hunting them. Emily dropped to low altitude and came up behind them like a ghost. Her final 2 missiles launched simultaneously, tracking toward targets that never saw death approaching. Fox 3. Fox 3. Splash 5 and 6. All bogeys destroyed. The radio crackled with silence for a long moment. Then Master Sergeant Lewis's voice came through filled with awe. Shadow Hawk Tower. Outstanding work. Base is secure. Request you return for landing. Copy Tower. Shadow Hawk inbound. And Tower. Yes, ma'am. Tell the General his coffee is getting cold. 20 minutes later, Emily taxied the F-22 to a stop on the flight line. As she shut down the engines and opened the canopy, she found herself surrounded by every pilot, ground crew member, and base personnel who could make it to the tarmac. They stood in absolute silence, staring at the woman who had just single-handedly saved an entire Air Force base. General Hayes walked slowly through the crowd, his face pale and his hands shaking. When he reached the aircraft, he looked up at Emily sitting in the cockpit and slowly removed his cap. Then, for the first time in his 30-year military career, General Robert Hayes saluted someone who outranked him, not in authority, but in pure skill and courage. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the silent flight line, "I owe you an apology. I owe this base an apology, and I owe the memory of your father the respect I should have shown from the beginning." Emily climbed down from the cockpit, removing her helmet to reveal hair damp with sweat and eyes bright with the adrenaline of combat. "General, all I ever wanted was the chance to serve, just like my father taught me." Hayes looked at her for a long moment, then turned to address the crowd of personnel surrounding them. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Captain Emily Parker. Effective immediately, she's the newest pilot in the 411th Fighter Squadron." The crowd erupted in cheers. But Emily held up her hand for silence. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I need to know something first." Hayes nodded slowly. "Will you judge me by my performance in that cockpit or by the assumptions you made while I was serving coffee?" Hayes's answer would echo through military aviation circles for years to come. "Captain Parker, after what I just witnessed, I'll judge you the same way your father would have wanted, as one of the finest pilots I've ever seen." 3 months later, Emily Parker was promoted to flight instructor, specializing in air-to-air combat tactics. The sign in General Hayes's office that had read, "Real pilots don't need GPS," was replaced with a new one. Real pilots prove themselves in the sky, not in the briefing room. And every morning at 0600, when new pilots arrived for training, they found their coffee waiting for them, served by combat veterans who understood that respect is earned through action, not assumption. Have you ever witnessed someone shatter expectations so completely that it changed everyone around them? Share this story because somewhere someone is still being underestimated simply because others can't see past their own prejudices. Emily never forgot the moment when General Hayes's face turned white with the realization that the coffee girl was actually the most skilled pilot on his base. Sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones capable of saving us all. If you believe that talent doesn't announce itself, it just performs when the moment demands it, then this story is for you. Because in a world quick to judge and slow to see, Emily Parker proved that heroes often come disguised as the help. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this.